Today's reading is from Luke 4, 1 through 13. Then Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan River. He was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where he was tempted by the devil for 40 days. Jesus ate nothing all that time and became very hungry. Then the devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become a loaf of bread." But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone." Then the devil took him up and revealed to him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. "I will give you the glory of these kingdoms and authority over them," the devil said, "because they are mine to give to anyone I please. I will give it all to you if you will worship me." Jesus replied, "The scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you are the Son of God, jump off. For the scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect and guard you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say, you must not test the Lord your God." When the devil had finished tempting Jesus, he left him until the next opportunity came.
Hey, I want to start this morning with a little confession. As a pastor, I'm supposed to understand people and how they think and like what they care about. And routinely, I have experiences that reveal to me that I do not at all. And as an example, as we were getting ready for the rummage sale, we were cleaning out the attic, and we have these bins of like old, ratty, nasty Christmas garland. And I told the staff, like, we should just throw all this out. And they said, no, you got to put that in the rummage sale. And I said, no one in their right mind is going to buy this stuff. Who would ever buy 25-year-old nasty, like old ratty Christmas garland? They said, no, someone will buy that. And I said, I insisted, there's no conceivable way that anyone buys this. And they said, no, they will buy it. So I said, okay, fine. You want to make a bet? I said, yeah, let's bet. I said, okay, fine. If someone buys this Christmas swag, you can publicly slap me in the face with a tortilla. They bought all the Christmas swag. It's all gone. It's all gone. So this week we'll videotape that. So look for that on our social media feed. I'm nothing if not a man of my word. I don't understand people, but I'll fulfill my vow in all righteousness. Okay. If you have not been here, we're in the second part of a 4-part story about Jesus. And this, if you have no church experience, this is a story the church tells every year in 4 parts. I mean, you may not know this, but if you have some church experience, you may not even know this. Every single year, from the church's perspective, the church looks out in the world and says, okay, being a human's hard. It's hard to be human. It's, how many times does a psalmist say, God knows that we are just dust, that we're mere mortal. Like, being human is hard, and we don't fully understand what it's all about, and we struggle right through our few years of life on this planet. So being human is kind of a mystery. And of course, you're going to turn to a lot of different narratives and a lot of different places to try to make sense of what it means to be human. And the church says to the world, listen, if you want to understand what it means to be human, look at Jesus. Jesus is the fullness of humanity, the full human, the true human, the perfect human, the archetypal human. If you want to gain some clarity on the mystery of what it means to be a human person, then reflect on the mystery of God made flesh, right? The mystery of the Word made flesh. And so every single year, to anchor people's lives and their identity in the life of Jesus, the church tells this story in 4 parts: Advent, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, right? So the idea is if you're born into the church, if you grow up in the church all the way up into your adulthood, year after year after year after year, without you even necessarily knowing it's happening, the church is rhythming your life. It's anchoring your sense of self in the rhythm of the life of Jesus, his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection. So that's what we're doing this year. We're just trying to make it a little more explicit. Because again, a lot of people can sit in church their whole lives, and you might even be sitting there now going like, oh, I had no idea that's what the church was doing. Well, that sounds really wise to do that. Well, yeah, the church is a pretty wise place. It's been doing it for 2,000 years, and for this reason. Okay? So we're in the second part of this story. It's the season of Epiphany. We're reflecting on Jesus' life. Church does a great job emphasizing Jesus' birth. Christmas is a big deal. We spend a lot of time anticipating and reflecting Jesus' birth. Church does a pretty good job reflecting on and proclaiming Jesus' death and resurrection. Easter's kind of a big deal. Jesus' life sometimes gets lost in the middle. But Jesus lived 30 plus years. His life was pretty important. In fact, I'll stress this again this morning. His death doesn't mean anything if not the culmination of a particular kind of life. His life is vital. If you think, or if you've ever heard someone say that in Jesus, God is saving people, I don't really care what you think saving means. Whatever you think it means, if God is saving people through Jesus, it's not just his birth and his death that do the saving. His life is integral to the process as well. And so what I've been doing in this series is I've just been reflecting on Jesus' life. The language I've been using is that God became what we are, flesh and blood. God took on flesh in the person of Jesus that we might become what God is. Or to use the language from the series title, that we might become fully human. God created human beings and intended them to live a certain way. And it is somehow through Jesus' birth, life, death, and resurrection that God is carrying us up into that fullness. So we're looking at the different seasons of Jesus' life to just talk about that and reflect on that. So we've looked at his early years, right? That sort of birth through 3, 4. We've looked at the middle years, right? 4 through 12. We've looked at the adolescent or teenage years, right? 12 to whenever, okay? Today I want to talk about adulthood, right? Jesus' adult years. So if you weren't here last week, we talked about adolescence. Adolescence, that word means to mature. Adolescence is a transition period. It is the transition between childhood and what we call adulthood. The kind of maturing that is supposed to happen during adolescence isn't just physical maturing. It's not just legal maturing, right? Obviously, everybody matures physically. Every culture has an age that we say, okay, you're a legal adult. But adolescence is about moral maturity. And the way I defined that last week is it is about becoming someone who knows the difference between good and evil. You know the difference between good and evil. And at the pit of your soul, down here, all the way here at the seat of your will, you want to do what is good, and you have the moral capacity to actually do it. You choose it. You know the difference between good and evil, and down here at the seat of your own personal will, you want to do that, and you choose to do that. That's the end goal of adolescence. Well, if adolescence is a transition from childhood to adulthood, then that's the definition of adulthood. What it means to be a spiritual adult is that you know the difference between good and evil, you love the good, and you choose the good. Today, I want to put just kind of a finer point to that. I want to clarify what's it look like on a daily basis? Every day when you get up, and you got to make 1,000 decisions today, what does spiritual adulthood look like in terms of how you actually live your life? What does knowing the good and wanting the good and choosing the good, what's it look like? Now, last week I made a connection between legal maturity and moral maturity, right? We all have a legal maturity age, right? It's like 18 to 21. You're legally an adult. And we wait that long because we assume it takes that long for you to become a moral adult. But if you're not careful, the connection might lead you to believe that being a morally mature person is just obeying the rules. We've all got rules to live by. We've all got standards. There's social standards. There's legal standards. And if you're someone who just, you obey the rules, then you're a mature person. But that's not true. Maturity is not just obeying the rules. It has more to do with why you obey them. But just as a couple of easy examples. Let's say for a minute, for argument's sake, that you're not in the habit of stealing. I think that's good, right? Stealing's bad. Don't do it. Actually, as a side note, we had a woman that stole from the rummage sale on Friday because at one point there were 150 people in line to check out. Like they were all buying nasty Christmas swag and they had to check out. And so apparently a woman didn't want to wait in line, so she just took stuff and walked out. We didn't focus on security. That was not part of our planning process. So she just walked out. But she came back the next day and paid for it. She's just I didn't want to steal from a church. It's would you steal from other people? It's okay. Anyway, so let's say for argument's sake, you're not in the habit of stealing. That's good. I don't think you should steal stuff. But why don't you steal? If the only reason you didn't steal was because there's a rule that says you shouldn't, and you might get caught and punished if you did, would we call you a morally mature person? You're better than the person who steals anyway, but we probably still wouldn't call you a morally mature person because that implies that if you could guarantee a situation where you wouldn't get caught, then you'd steal. Think about driving the speed limit. Let's assume most of you, most of the time, are in the habit of driving the speed limit. I think that's a good idea. Some of you are like, no, I don't. No, and he definitely does not, right? I think you should drive the speed limit or close to it, right? Reasonably close to it. But why? If the only reason that you drove the speed limit was because there's a rule that says you must, and there's a risk if you don't, like getting a ticket or getting your license suspended, yeah, you're probably better than the person who just wantonly disregards the speed limit, but I don't think we would call you a morally mature person, because that implies that you would drive through my neighborhood, 25-mile-an-hour neighborhood with kids everywhere, that you would drive through my neighborhood at 60 miles an hour if you could guarantee that there's no way you'd get caught or get in trouble. So that's not moral maturity, and we all know that. Moral maturity is not just obeying the rules. That's not what it means to know the good and do the good. Knowing the good and wanting the good and choosing the good always has to do with people. You've heard me say this before, but there's always someone on the other side. You have 1,000 decisions to make today, and there's always someone on the other side of it. That to be a morally mature person is to always be thinking about that person. You don't steal, not because there's a rule that says you shouldn't or because you might get punished if you got caught, but because you'd be taking something from someone else. You'd be taking something that belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you. And in that way, you would be doing them a wrong. You don't drive 60 miles an hour through my neighborhood because there are humans who live there. There are little kids who could dart out into the street after a ball. That's why you don't speed, is because in your mind, there's always a person on the other side. And to live as a morally mature person, you're always thinking about that person. So I'll say it this way. Being a spiritual adult is being so connected to and so committed to other people that you are always spending your life on their behalf, even if it comes at great cost to you. To use language that I think comes out of the story that you heard this morning, I'll say it this way, that you will never save yourself at the expense of other people. That to be spiritually mature, to be an adult, is to care so deeply for others, to be so committed to them that they matter just as much as you matter, even if you don't know them, even if they hate you. And that what it means to be human is to spend your life, to give your life for their sake, even at great cost to yourself. You know, we talk about Jesus as being the full human, the true human, the archetypal human. The story that you heard this morning, which I'm sure is very familiar to many of you, before Jesus starts his public ministry, he's led by the Holy Spirit into the desert where he's tempted for 40 days. Just think about the 40 days as his preparation for his vocation, his calling. Where we get the English word calling is the Latin vocatio, vocation. All of us have a calling. I don't care if you're a baker or a carpenter or a teacher or a brain surgeon or a taxi driver or a stay-at-home parent. All of us, we're called to spend our lives doing something. It's a vocation. It's a calling. And for any one of those vocations, there's usually a prep process. You got to go through some kind of process to prepare yourself to be able to go out and do that thing, to live out that vocation. You want to be a Navy SEAL? You got to go to SEAL training. You want to be a doctor? You got to go to medical school. You want to be a teacher? You got to go learn how to educate people. There's usually a prep process for any vocation, right? Here's the thing that I don't think we appreciate, but Jesus certainly did. Vocation's not just limited to what you do to pay the bills. Humanity in general is a vocation. It's a calling. Being human is a calling. It's a specific vocation to live a very particular way. And what you see happening here in this desert wilderness temptation scene is Jesus, as the fullness of humanity, is being prepared to live that vocation out. This is his prep process. As you think about what these temptations are about, a lot has been said of this scene, a lot can be said of this scene. The thing I want to draw out of this scene this morning is it pivots, in my mind, on this idea of saving yourself. What Jesus came to do was made explicit at his birth announcement. He came to save people from their sins. Sin, this idea, is anything that holds people in bondage to evil. Jesus came to save people from that, to set them loose, okay? To rescue them. Every temptation that he faces in the wilderness is essentially a temptation to try and live out that role, that job, that calling, that vocation, while first saving himself. So it's Jesus, go about your business of saving other people, just do it by saving yourself. Now, that may not come out explicitly in the story. So you might hear the story, like, Mike, I don't know, where do you get that? The end of the story, Luke says that the devil left Jesus until the next opportunity came. Well, the next time in Luke's gospel that you hear language reminiscent of this scene in the wilderness is when Jesus is hanging on the cross. So twice in the wilderness scene, you hear the language, if you are the Son of God, fill in the blank. If you are the Son of God, turn stones to bread. If you are the Son of God, right? Jump off the temple. If you are the Son of God. The next time you hear someone use that phrase, if you are the Son of God, Jesus is hanging on a cross. It's uttered by the crowd's people. It's uttered by the religious leaders. It's even uttered by the criminal hanging on one of his sides. If you are the Son of God. Only in that scene, they make explicit what is implicit in the temptation scene, because they add these two very key words. If you are the Son of God, what? Save yourself. Save yourself. If you are the Son of God, save yourself. I think what they make explicit while Jesus hangs on the cross, that's the opportunity. That's the opportune moment. Jesus, you're suffering. You're in pain. If you are the Son of God, save yourself. Those are the temptations that Jesus is facing in his prep process. Jesus, you're hungry. You're hungry. Turn stones to bread. It's cool that you came to save people. I'm not trying to stop you from doing that. Just save yourself first. Jesus, why don't you just jump off the temple? The angels will catch you. You won't get hurt. And just imagine, people see that. You'll be famous. Jesus, just bow down and worship me, and I'll put you in charge of everything. Just think of all the good you could do, Jesus, if you were in charge of all the kingdoms. Right? You could appreciate that if only you were in charge, right? If only someone would give you all of the power and influence in the world, you'd fix everything, wouldn't you? Jesus, I think it's great that you came to save people. That's awesome. I think you ought to do it from a position of wealth and power and influence, because that's how we do it. Save yourself, Jesus. It's cool that you want to give your life away to other people. Just save yourself first. I think that's the temptation. I think Jesus understood that what it meant to be human was to be called by God. It's a vocation. It doesn't matter if you're a baker or a candlestick maker. As a human person, you have been called by God to live a particular way. It is to give your life away for the sake of the world, and you don't do that by saving yourself first. You do it even when it comes at great cost to yourself. And Jesus understood that. That's why he didn't give in to any of these temptations, not there and not while hanging from the cross. That to be human is to care so deeply about, to be so connected to other people and so committed to them that your whole life, everything that you do, is always connected to somebody else. Even people you don't know. It's always connected to somebody else. And the decisions you make and how you operate in this world are always about them. You're always thinking about them. That was the perfection of Jesus' life. That's what it means when it says that he was obedient to the Father even unto death. This is what human beings are supposed to be. I think it's what bothered Jesus so much. There's so many scenes in Jesus' life where he's clearly frustrated with people. And I think from his perspective, I mean, if you've read the story, you know, God comes and chooses a guy named Abraham and says, Abraham, I'm just the kind of guy that likes to bless people, So I'm just going to give you a lot of kids. And I'm going to bless them. And then I'm going to do something awesome. I'm going to bless the whole world through you guys. You're going to be my people, my kids, and you're going to go live in the world, and you're going to give your lives away for the world, and I'm going to bless everybody through you. That's a calling. It's a vocation. But over and over and over and over again, the people of Israel forget that was the point. They get their minds on other things. By the time Jesus rolls around, it's like you would never know that that's what their religion was always supposed to be about. And how many scenes does that come out? Let me just give you one. Luke 13, it's a Sabbath day. Jesus is in a synagogue. Jesus was a good religious guy. He went to synagogue on Sabbath. He's in the synagogue on the Sabbath. There's a woman there who's been crippled for 18 years. The way that Jesus describes it is she's been held in bondage by Satan for 18 years. So there's that sin language, held in bondage, 18 years. He decides to heal her. It's a Sabbath day. A lot of people in Jesus' culture were not okay with that. Healing was a form of work. And in their world, unless your life was in jeopardy, you really shouldn't do the work to intervene. Of course, her life was obviously not in jeopardy. She'd been in this condition for 18 years. What's one more day? And that's what the synagogue ruler says. He says, there are 6 days of the week for working. Come on one of those days to be healed, not on the Sabbath day. Jesus' response, he is clearly frustrated. But in his words, you can pick up what the frustration is about. He says, you work on the Sabbath. Every Sabbath day you get up. You don't have any problem working. You untie your animals and you lead them out to pasture every Sabbath day. But you're going to be bothered that I help this daughter of Abraham, this human being, your sister? You care more about ox and goats and donkeys than you care about your sister who's been in bondage for 18 years? It's like what frustrated Jesus was, okay, synagogue ruler, I get it. You don't have the power to heal her. I understand. But it seems to me that even if you had the power to heal her, you wouldn't do it. Because you don't care. You don't care about her. She's not important to you. Not as important as your religious law is, or I should better say, your interpretation of your religious law. That's what bothers him. You're supposed to be committed to her, so committed to her that you will spend your life on her behalf. But here you are, leader of the synagogue, and you don't get it. Been in church your whole life. You're responsible for leading other people, and you're not grown up yet. How many times did Jesus tell a parable about a fruit tree? Plenty old enough, been around long enough, rooted in perfectly good soil, gets plenty of sun, gets plenty of light. There's no problem with the externals, and yet it's not bearing fruit. And Jesus says, what's up? There's no figs on this tree. And it's pretty clear. It's like, you guys are supposed to get this. You've been around long enough. We've been doing this long enough. You are supposed to understand that what it means to be a child of God, to be a human being, is to give your life away for the sake of the world. Is to spend your life on behalf of others, even if it comes at great cost to you. But you don't do that. That's not what your religion is about. You've missed it. You're stuck in spiritual childhood. It's the problem with the rich man in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. You know that story? There's a rich guy. He gets up every day, and there's a poor beggar named Lazarus, literally, like laying on his porch. Okay, so we're not talking about like the person who lives 8,000 miles away and you don't know who they are and you don't know what the problem is. We're talking about a guy on your porch. You have to step over him to get to work in the morning. And every single day, the rich guy walks right past him and does nothing to help him. Nothing. And I think the point Jesus is making, at least one of them, is you're supposed to give your life away for the sake of him, even if it comes at great cost to yourself. You won't even give minimal cost. I mean, to give that guy a lunch for someone as rich as you would cost you nothing, and you still won't do it. Because you don't care. Because he's not a human being to you. He's just an object. He's just in your way. You're not committed to him. You don't take responsibility for him the way that you're supposed to. That's what it means to be an adult. From Jesus' perspective, I think. That to be a spiritual adult is to take all the religious stuff, all the coming to church, all the prayer, all the Bible reading, right? All the Bibles, all the stuff that we do. And it's to get to this point where you go, okay, what it means to be a human being is I get up every day, and whether I'm a teacher or a baker or a taxi driver or a stay-at-home parent, it doesn't matter. That's how I earn a living. That's how I pay the bills. My vocation is to spend my life for the sake of other people. Even if it comes at great cost to me, even if it costs me everything. That to grow up into spiritual adulthood, and I'll say it this way, is to say, I am not going to save myself at the expense of other people. It's all or nothing. Either they come or none of us go. Because that's how much I care. That's how important they are to me. You know, the scary thing to me is you can spend your whole life in a church. You can spend your whole life in a religious community. You can read the Bible cover to cover every year of your life. You can be in Bible studies. You can go on missions trips. You can do all the things. And never grow up. Never grow up into a spiritual adulthood. Never actually allow the fruit of your belief in Jesus to get down here, all the way down here in your gut. Where when you look out into the world and you look at people you don't even know, people maybe even you'd be predisposed to hate, or people who hate you. But something down here has so radically changed and shifted that when you look at people, you say, you belong to me. You're important to me. You are mine, and I am yours. And I will give my life for your sake. So what Jesus says, there's no greater love than that. To give your life away, right, for the sake of another. So often, though, religion becomes just another way, maybe the ultimate way of not having to give our lives to other people, of creating distinctions where some groups get it and some groups don't, and we're important and you're not. To grow up into spiritual adulthood is to be so committed to other people that you will give your life for their sake. You refuse to save yourself at their expense. You will not be saved unless it means they are too. Let me tell you another parable. This one doesn't come from Jesus. This one comes from Fyodor Dostoevsky. He wrote a small book called The Brothers Karamazov. This parable is called the Parable of the Onion. It's told by a character named Grushenka. And Grushenka is not a good person. She's not a moral person, but she, like any good character, she's complicated. Like all of us. She's not a good person. She does not spend her life doing good things, but she's wrestling. She's wrestling with who God is and how God feels about her and her place before God. She's asking those kinds of questions. And she's having a conversation, and she tells a parable called the Parable of the Onion, and it touches on this theme. This is how it goes. Once upon a time, there was a wicked, wicked woman who died, and she left behind her not one single good deed. The devils seized her and threw her into the fiery lake. But her guardian angel stood and thought, what good deed of hers might I remember in order to tell God? He remembered, and he told God, she once pulled up an onion in the kitchen garden, and she gave it to a beggar woman. And God replied to the angel, very well, take that very same onion and offer it to her in the lake. Let her reach out for it and hold on to it. And if you can pull her out of the lake, then let her go to heaven. But if the onion breaks, then let the woman remain where she is now. The angel ran over to the woman and offered her the onion. Here you are, woman, he said. Reach for it. Hold on to it. And then carefully he began to pull her. And soon she was nearly all the way out. But then the other sinners in the lake, when they saw that she was being pulled out, all began to catch hold of her, so that they should be pulled out together with her. But the woman was a wicked, wicked woman, and she began to kick them with her feet. I'm the one who's being pulled out, not you. The onion's mine, not yours. And no sooner has she said that than the onion broke, and the woman fell back into the lake and burns there to this very day. As for the angel, he began to weep and left the spot. That's a pretty powerful story, isn't it? But I think it illustrates the same thing that Jesus illustrated over and over again. She didn't get it. She didn't get it. And here's the scary thing. She didn't know she didn't get it until right there. You can spend your whole life in a church. You can read the Bible 1,000 times. You can go to 1,000 prayer meetings and not realize that down here, all the way down here, life is still ultimately about you. That you haven't chosen to use your humanity as a vehicle to save others. She literally has the opportunity to carry people with her, to be the very vehicle by which they get set free. And instead of seeing it that way, and instead of caring, in her mind, instead of going, I'm not going unless they get to come with me, she sees it as an opportunity to say, oh, happy day. It's my turn. I get to go. Sucks to be you guys. Don't get in my way. Religion can do that to you. It can do that to you, and you don't realize it. That all the way down, you don't really care. You don't really care about other people. You're not really committed to them. You're not really prepared to give your life for the sake of other people. Moral maturity, spiritual maturity, adult maturity is always knowing that there's another person on the other side and that that's all you care about. What you care about is the other person. And you spend your life on their behalf, even if it comes at great cost to you. That is who Jesus is. Jesus' death means nothing unless it's the culmination of a particular kind of life. And that is exactly how the New Testament authors frame it. That Jesus was obedient to the Father even unto death. That from the desert all the way to the cross, Jesus refused to save people by first saving himself. He would not save himself at the expense of others. He would pour himself out totally and completely on behalf of the world. And because Jesus is the full human, somehow mysteriously, we're all caught up in that. We all get sort of pulled into that reality. We don't feel it every day in practice. When I think about how I live my life, when I think about how other people live their lives, people who I'm supposed to be influencing, I'm not always very encouraged. Being human's hard. Like, we don't live like Jesus the way that we're supposed to. But because of Jesus, we're in him, we're being carried up into that ultimate future. But there's also that invitation to us now. Because you know that. You know that that's what it means to be human. In the Spirit of Christ, Jesus is saying, come and follow me. Live that way. Know that there are people. Whatever you do for it doesn't matter. Spend your life for the sake of others. That's what it means to become fully human. We're going to finish our service this morning by taking communion together. For those of you who are new here, we take communion every week. As far as the church is concerned, this was instituted by Christ, and it's been celebrated by the church for 2,000 years. Every single week for 2,000 years, a group of people for whom the most important thing is their God and their love for their God and their God's love for them. Every week, they get together. Could stay home, could watch TV, could go do something else. But you're someone who's been loved and saved, and you love the God who saved you, so you come here every week to say thank you, to love your God, to worship him because he's worth that, and to be framed and to be shaped as the people God created you to be. And the Eucharist, the bread that represents Jesus' body, the juice that represents his shed blood, it doesn't work in us. It reminds us who our God is, that our God refuses to save just one person. We all come, right? And it's an invitation to participate, to leave this place and go out into the world and think differently about what it means to be human. That we lay our lives down, we give our lives for the sake of the world that God so loves. That's living into adulthood. That's the life you want. You want to live into that life? That's the call to the church. That's the invitation, the vocation of the church. I invite you to come forward. In just a second, I'll ask you to stand. I'll dismiss you starting in the back rows. I invite you to come down our center aisle here. Our communion tables are on the sides of our stage. You'll take a prepackaged communion cup back to your seat using the side aisles, and then you can take that during this last song as you feel led. All right, I'm going to invite you to stand. Let me pray for us. God, we love and we worship you. We thank you for your great love for us, that through the birth, life, death, and resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, that you are carrying all of us up into the fullness of what it means to be human. I pray that we would surrender to you, that we would allow you to rescue us, to save us from what holds us in bondage, especially our lack of concern and our lack of commitment to the rest of your children. We surrender ourselves to you. We ask that through these elements, you do a work of grace in our lives. Continue to transform us to be people of love in the world. In Jesus' name we pray.
Jesus.